Cape Ann plays a vital role in an important international story. We're talking to Eric Hutchins. Eric is the Habitat Restoration Biologist for the NOAA Restoration Center. Hi, Eric.
How are you? Good morning.
Good. Can you tell us about the life cycle of the American eel and why it's important on Cape Ann?
Yeah, why is it important on Cape Ann? Well, in particular, it's important on Cape Ann. All fish are, because the fishing industry and recreational fishing are so important for so many jobs, so many people, for their recreation. So even in general, fish are important. If you live on Cape Ann, you gotta relate to fish. And a lot of people don't necessarily think about eels because they often don't see them or think about them. But eels are everywhere around Cape Ann. They're in all of our waterways. I grew up in East Gloucester. I grew up in Rockport and Gloucester. And I grew up catching little eels, big eels at Good Harbor Beach as a child, putting them in buckets like everybody else has as a child. They're there, but you often don't see them. Eels are not on the menu too often. Matter of fact, they're almost never on our menu around here. Though if you travel to anywhere in Europe, almost any decent restaurant in Europe is serving American or European eel.
Hold on, sushi. They're on sushi.
They are on sushi. And actually some of the sushi eels, which I will get to in a moment, that get imported to the United States from Japan or somewhere else in Asia may have actually originated right here in New England, which I will get to that, which is a little bit of the economic side of American eels. But anyway, American eels, a quick synopsis of their life cycle and the work that we do, in particular that I'm doing in Rockport with local volunteers. At the Rockport Millbrook Meadow, a park where the little dam is, just up the stream from Front Beach, there's a dam, and we have an eel trap on the top side of that dam, and we've been monitoring it now for 5 years, catching all of the eels that swim up the stream, trying to make their way into Rockport waters. And we catch them every year with volunteers. We have a group of 7 or 8 volunteers that once a day we check the eel trap and collect the data. Those baby eels returning from the ocean are usually 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 inches long. That's it. And for the most part, these are the eels that were born last fall. And one of the things I want to bring up is many of the points I'm bringing up are the very talking points that I talk with people in the public. Because our eel trap is in the middle of a municipal park, every day we check that eel trap, unless it's pouring rain, the public comes over to us and says, "What are you doing?" And they ask their standard set of questions, or I give my standard set of questions to them to invigorate some dialogue, such as, "Where did those eels come from?" And then I say to them, how far away do you think these 2-inch eels swam to get to Rockport? And it's often a family, sometimes a mother, a father, and 3 kids. "Oh, 1 mile more, 2 miles more." And then they just start looking at me really strange. And then one of the kids will say, 50 miles more. And then they're like, "You're lying." "No, more." And 1,000 miles more. And then they can't believe it. A 2-inch eel swam back to Rockport in the bucket that we just caught. These American eels are born in the range of 2,000 to 2,300 miles away from Rockport. They are born in the Sargasso Sea east of Bermuda. It's in that range, around 2,000 miles. We do not know exactly where they are born. Hundreds of years of research, and no one has ever documented an adult eel laying eggs in the Sargasso Sea. We only know where they lay their eggs because of the really super young ones that we've caught, but we've never actually found breeding eels in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, though we know based on the babies that have the very young larvae that have been captured, they follow the Gulf Stream. That's what gives them a free ride up and down up the East Coast. And
so hold on right there. So you've seen the babies in the Sargasso Sea, but not.
Yes, they've been caught out there in nets.
Okay, but never adults.
Adults have never been caught in breeding motion. Never.
That's amazing.
And only a couple years ago was one of the first radio tagged eels released. I believe it was Newfoundland, that actually we were able to follow it almost all the way back to the Sargasso Sea on its return run to lay eggs, but then the tag fell off. So there's still a lot of mystery that we do not know about American eels. So anyway, those 2 to 3 inch eels returned around 2,000 miles from the Sargasso Sea, taking a free ride on the Gulf Stream. And then we don't know what their cue is, but they head off the Gulf Stream and head inland towards the east coast of the United States, all the way up and down the east coast of the United States and the Gulf of Mexico, and all the way up to Canada and even up into Greenland, where they start to mix with European eels. So the baby eels that return to Rockport are not eels that their parents came from here. There's nothing that tells us that we believe that. They're just random.
Yeah, they just find a little river and they start heading up.
And they just go for it.
Yeah.
So those eels come in, and I looked at some of my data for the past 5 years. In Rockport, since 2016, the earliest we've caught an eel in Rockport, we set the trap every year, April 1st, and we run it through Columbus Day. It's one of the longest operating traps in Massachusetts. Most of them end by early July. This one we start about the same time as a few other traps in Massachusetts, but carry it all the way to the fall. Our earliest is, I think, April 14th back in 2017. We got our first eel with a water temperature of 14 degrees Celsius. Other years, the latest that we've caught a returning eel in Rockport was June 8th. So thus far, with 5 years worth of data, that's kind of our range. Really late is early June, really early is early April. That's kind of the range that we catch our first eel. And our last eels, they're still coming in. September 1, October 5th, October 5th, October 12th. Those are the variety of years that's the last. And it's really good that they end around October, because it starts to rain a lot, it starts to get cold, and people get tired of checking the trap after almost 6 months, including myself. So it's kind of fun that way. Installing the trap in April, there's still sometimes, or late March, there's still sometimes ice on the pond, and hands are getting pretty cold setting that trap up, which sometimes takes a couple of hours. So anyway, first eels arrive early April. They're 2 to 3, 3 to 4 inches. And they come up into Mill Pond, and this is happening all up and down the East Coast, but I'm using the Rockport Mill Pond as our example for Cape Ann. And they'll live, and then one of the other questions I ask people is, how long do you think they live here? They're not like salmon, they're not like river herring that go up, lay their eggs, and leave. They're coming here to live. They're called catadromous. So they live most of their lives in fresh water or nearshore estuaries. The females go further upstream, typically get larger, live in the larger lakes. They can go upstream hundreds of miles, live their life out upwards and over 20 years in a freshwater system. And then they get a cue, which we don't know exactly what it is, towards the end of the summer, early fall. They stop eating, they've put on lots of fat, and then they get the cue to out-migrate. That's when you sometimes get up to a 3-foot long, 3-inch diameter female eel that's heading back to the Sargasso Sea, and they out-migrate during large rain events in, October, November-ish, maybe late September, in the fall. So water levels are up. That way they can make it over impediments. Sometimes people see them going across grass. If there's a dam in the way, they can often make it over them. And they often out-migrate in mass. A couple of days, a couple of rain events. So there's places in the world where it's like an event. You go see the eels heading out to sea. We don't have enough in our little Millbrook to actually say, I'm going to go look at them. But 20 plus years in the system, then they'll migrate that 2,000 miles back to the Sargasso Sea, lay their eggs, and die.
So they only lay eggs once in their lifetime.
Once in their lifetime.
Will go 20 years without reproducing.
Correct.
That's kind of unusual for a species, right?
Yes, very, very unusual. Once, that's it. You got one shot.
Right. And you go 20 years without having babies and just living a pretty good life and no stress.
Yep.
No babies.
And one of the unfortunate things is with a biology like that, impacts from humans can take a long time to show up in their population. Something could be installed and there's multiple generations still going out that were born years ago, but all of a sudden, 20 years later, you don't know that maybe those babies weren't living. and that's something to always worry about. Eel populations are significantly down all around the world, worldwide. There are different species of eels. I can't remember how many, 16 or 26. I'm not an worldwide eel expert, but they're down everywhere for a variety of reasons, habitat oriented and harvest, a little bit of everything, and parasites. So there's been a number of things happening to eels that have dropped their populations significantly.
I want to back up to the trap. What are you doing with these eels, these baby eels, once you trap them?
Oh, we have a trap that catches, in theory, every eel that makes it over the Millbrook Dam we catch. Mm-hmm. A couple might make it over, but I think we probably catch most of them that make it over that dam. We actually open up we have you can see it if you go down to the Mill Pond Dam, public location, you can see the trap. We open it up, take the temperature, always put the eels in a white bucket so that if there's any public while you're doing your work, someone can come along and look at the eels. For many people, it's the first time they've ever seen one. We mm-hmm. count them. We just do a visual estimate of their length. We're not putting them on a measuring board. Some of the sites that biologists are working on them are taking more detailed measurements. We've found that to do this for 7 months, the visual estimate is very helpful. We do it by 1-inch increments, 2 to 3 inches, 3 to 4. Then we simply release them right there into Mill Pond.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, great. So then they can continue their journey from the Mill Pond up into
Yep.
whatever river they're going to. Okay.
Yeah, and the Millbrook, gotta remember, Millbrook is only 1 square mile. It's a tiny brook. It runs into the middle of Dogtown into Briar Swamp, where we know they make it to Mill Pond. We're almost sure, though I haven't caught one yet, that they make it to Loop Pond, which is about a half mile upstream. And one of these days, I want to put a trap in Briar Swamp to see if there's any chance they're living in the Sphagnum Bog upstream. They might be. We don't know. They're that ubiquitous. They can live in just moist areas, and live on insects and other things. We just don't know.
And you mentioned earlier that people just don't see them. Are they sort of really secretive in their habitat?
Yeah, they're dark. Yeah. Their coloration is amazingly good at hiding. So they're in muddy. So when they first enter from the ocean, they're called glass eels. If you've never seen a glass eel, it's amazing. Perfectly translucent, other than an eye spot and some of the internal pieces of bone. Even the bone is translucent. That's to allow them to make it through the water column from the Sargasso Sea. The moment they enter fresh water, they start to take on pigment. So then they hide in a freshwater system with browns and grays and black. A typical pond and stream where they like to live is black mud and detritus. So it's very hard to see them. They also like to live in crevices. So they're in the mud in the base. They're in walls. They're in a lot of times if I'm snorkeling in an area, they're living under a rock and all you see is the head sticking out. So they hide in ubiquitous places. But I'll tell you one place which is kind of unique that you see them very, very clearly once in a while. Halibut Point State Park, the quarry. Eels have found their way there. That's a man-made quarry. There's no definitive stream running out of it, but there are seeps that are running down to the ocean, and they've even discovered those, and some have made it. I don't think anyone transplanted them there. They found their way into Halibut Point State Park. Halibut Point has eels that actually make it in it as babies, and I've seen tremendous sizes, only a couple of them, but sometimes because of the clear water in a quarry, you can see them perfectly. Unlike in a pond, you look down and you can actually watch them swim along the ledges. That's really, really neat.
So Eric, here is my question. I'm curious about tagging these eels. What does that entail?
Adults, not the babies, but the adults, they can actually put what's called a Vemco tag. It's a tag that actually is picked up by satellites. A big eel can actually be tagged with it's called a Vemco tag, or there's some other types. So they actually can pick up the data from a satellite, so we know its depth, that it's swimming, and we can pick it up, its pace underwater, believe it or not. The tag gets released and releases the data. So it's used a lot on tuna fish and swordfish and turtles and large pelagic species, but they're getting smaller and people are experimenting with them on smaller fish now.
Very cool.
I think it's only been done a couple of times with eels.
One last question.
Yep.
How are we protecting the eels?
We're protecting them. Only 2 states in the East Coast of the United States allow a harvest. South Carolina and Maine, and not that many are harvested in South Carolina. These are the babies. Maine has a harvest. I can't remember what the number of pounds is, but the price of eels is a big driver. It's the second number one. It's the second economic fishery in the state of Maine next to lobsters. And this is my other question to people. How much for a pound of eels? I said, okay, let's say a pound of good shrimp is $15 a pound. I'll ask the public, how much for a pound of eels? And they'll start guessing, $20, $30, more. A pound of baby eels caught in the springtime will fetch, in the past few years, as much as $2,500 a pound. Fishermen can catch sometimes as much as 10 pounds in one night. It is a tremendously lucrative fishery. And it's a quota, so it's quota driven. When the quota's done, the fishery shuts down. And then adult eels, and those fish are mostly, if not all, flown in airplanes over to Japan and some other countries in Asia, where they grow them out for about 1.5 years to about 1.5 to 2 feet long, and they're mostly used for the sushi market and Japanese market. So a lot of them actually come back to the United States to make it into our restaurants.
Oh. Well, this is such a fascinating story, and it's so great to hear that that you guys are doing work to keep track of them, at least in Millbrook Meadow. And what time are you usually there, Eric? Because I want to go check.
Well, we try, in years past, we try to do Saturdays at 9 a.m.
Okay.
The other days, we let people do it whenever they want, which makes it simpler.
Right.
Like your own. But I try to do most Saturdays. I try to go at 9 a.m. This year, like everything, it's been a little mixed up. But 9 a.m. on Saturdays, and if anyone ever wants an appointment to actually see the eels, like yourselves or people I'm more than happy to line up a time when people can come down and see the eels. And it can be done through social distancing as well. I'll put the bucket out and they can look at them.
Right.
We caught our first eel this year on April 20th. We've only caught 7 so far this year. Last year, we caught a total of 308 throughout the season. And in 2017, we caught 1,924. So we never know how many are going to come in. In 2016, we caught a total of only 10. So we just don't know. We never know. So it's always a mystery. You might go down there this Saturday and I'll have 500. We've actually caught as many as 500 in one day. Never know what we're going to catch. So it's really neat to get down there and see. More than happy to show people anytime they want.
Great. Okay, we're going to have to go to our next meeting, but can we include your email in the copy so that people could reach out to you?
Absolutely.
Appointment? Okay,
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric, for talking to us. This is just a fascinating story.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Eric.
Bye-bye.